Hello everyone. So today we are going to understand about anaerobic respiration which occurs in the absence of oxygen. So you all might be studying about aerobic respiration which occurs in the presence of oxygen, and we have seen there were four steps involved. Firstly, we have seen there was glycolysis, and we have also studied about link reaction, Krebs cycle, and then we have studied about electron transport chain. But in case of the anaerobic respiration students, glycolysis is obviously going to take place. And by the process of glycolysis, we will see the glucose is getting broken down into 2-pyruvic acid. But now the fate of the pyruvic acid is decided whether there is oxygen present or not in the cell. When the oxygen is present, we are going to see eventually it is going to enter the mitochondria and aerobic respiration will occur. But if there is absence of oxygen, then we are going to see the fate of the absence of oxygen. So then the fate is going to change. We are going to see that the anaerobic respiration is going to occur, for which we are going to see this pyruvic acid might undergo alcohol fermentation, okay, or it might undergo even lactic acid fermentation, okay. So these are the three fates of the pyruvic acid that is forming in the cytoplasm. And you can see that aerobic respiration was occurring in mitochondria as well. But if you come to see in this case of the anaerobic respiration, it is occurring in the cytoplasm only exclusively. Okay, all this fermentation that we can see, it is happening here. Now, students, what is fermentation? Again, it is a anaerobic pathway where we can see majority of the prokaryotes and even eukaryotes in the prokaryotes also. So that is why it is exclusively happening in the cytoplasm, because we have seen that certain bacteria might not be having the mitochondria as well, right? The bacteria do not have their prokaryotes. So we can see the lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation is going to take place. Now that we know about it, let us discuss about the alcohol fermentation. In alcohol fermentation, we will see ethanol is produced, but how? So the pyruvic acid, here we can see the carboxyl group which is present. It is going to be removed by decarboxylation. So we are going to see there is going to be removal of the carbon dioxide by the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase, and it is going to form acetaldehyde. Then we are going to see reduction is going to happen, and the NADH which was formed during the glycolysis, it is going to be utilized. That means NADH is not going to give the indirect ATP here. Now we can see it is going to be utilized, and there is going to be regeneration of NAD. And how many NAD is going to happen, students? As you remember, the pyruvic acid that was forming, it was 2-pyruvic acid. That means in this whole alcohol fermentation, all these molecules that are forming, there will be 2-pyruvic acid forming, 2 alcohol, and 2 acetaldehyde, 2 ethanol, and along with that, 2 carbon dioxide is going to be released. So 2 NADH going to be utilized and 2 NAD is going to be released. Okay. Now, if we come to our lactic acid fermentation, you all might be eating those curd, right? So what is curd having? Curd is having lactic acid. So is it that only, let's say, the bacteria lactobacillus is going to do this lactic acid fermentation? Not only bacteria, even in our muscle cells, we can see when there is absence of oxygen, or by chance that the oxygen presence is not there, that time if we require energy, our muscle cells are going to do lactic acid fermentation. So the pyruvic acid is going to turn into lactic acid by the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase. Here again we will see 2 NADH is going to be utilized, 2 NAD is going to be released. So 2 pyruvic acid is going to form 2 lactic acid as well. Okay, but students, here we do not see any kind of no CO2 is released. But now, if you see here that in case of the alcohol fermentation, there was carbon dioxide release. And let me tell you that this alcohol fermentation is going to help us in various ways in beverage industries and even also in baking industry as well. So the use of alcohol fermentation in beverages industry and also in baking industry. In baking industry, how it is being utilized? So just to give you an idea about it, so I love making pizzas. So whenever I make pizza, what do I use? Like whenever I make the dough, so in this dough, I use yeast powder. Okay. So the yeast powders are available. I'm going to use that. Along with that, I use some sugar. Okay. So that the using this sugar, the yeast is going to do anaerobic respiration. That means alcohol fermentation is done, right? So in this anaerobic respiration, what we are going to see in alcohol fermentation, there is going to be release of carbon dioxide plus the alcohol. So as the carbon dioxide is released, we are going to notice something very good. That is going to help in like making the pizza bread or any kind of bread fluffy. So we will see that the size of this dough is going to increase. And as the size of this dough increases, why does it increase? It is increasing because there is release of carbon dioxide, which is making our dough fluffy. And when we are going to bake it, we are going to see that we're going to get very good breads as well. But what about the alcohol? So when we are baking, the alcohol evaporates as well. Okay. So now let us come to the net ATP production. So we have seen during glycolysis that was happening, what we have noticed that the glucose, one glucose molecule was giving two pyruvic acid, right? We have seen this happening. But in this process, what we have noticed that NADH, 2 NADH was being released and 2 NAD was utilized. And we have also seen that 2 ATP was released and 2 ADP was utilized. Like it is a net gain I am telling about. Now, what was happening then in the anaerobic respiration? We have seen this pyruvic acid. It has two fates. It can undergo lactic acid fermentation, so it will be forming lactic acid, or we can see it can also form the ethanol as well. So these are the two fates that we can notice. But students, if you say here, there is no like that is ATP forming here in the steps, right? When there is alcohol fermentation, or you can say the lactic acid formation, we could see there was reduction, right? And during this process, the NADH was being utilized, and again we will see that NAD, 2 NAD was being released. So what we can see here, the net gain is going to be net ATP production is going to be 2 ATP only because there is no ATP releasing steps in this fermentation. Rather, we can see that in case of the ethanol fermentation, we have seen carbon dioxide was released, but in case of lactic acid, no CO2, right? We didn't see any CO2 coming. But in this both step, we could see that NADH was being utilized, right? And NAD was regenerated. That means, and how many? So here there was two. So again, we will see here that two NADH was utilized in each of this fermentation and two NAD. So we can say that there is going to be regeneration of the NAD. That means the indirect ATP that we used to get from the that is our NADH, we are not going to get it, right? We used to get it in the aerobic respiration because now the NADH is going to be utilized here. So students, I have another question. What is the maximum concentration of the alcohol? So students, the alcohol fermentation that we have studied, we are using the yeast. But students, yeast are going to poison themselves up like after the 13% concentration. So the naturally fermented alcohol we get, it is just 13%. Okay. Now, what about the whiskey? The beer ones we can see they are having low percentage of alcohol. But if we make high, want to make by chance higher percentage of alcohol, how we can do that? So for that we have to do distillation. So in distillation process, what we are doing? Let's say we are taking ethanol and we are going to heat it. And heating will be done at a temperature of about 80 degrees to 100 degrees Celsius. And when we are doing that, we will get a condensed liquid. and this condensed liquid is having higher percentage of alcohol as well. Okay, so I hope all of you have understood that in anaerobic respiration we will see only 2 ATP is released, because during the glycolysis 2 ATP release, and NADH is not going to give any kind of ATP because it is going to be regenerated into NAD. And we have seen there are two kinds of fermentation: alcohol fermentation and also lactic acid fermentation. In alcohol fermentation, carbon dioxide will be released, and we have seen the lactic acid fermentation, which is occurring in the not only in the lactobacillus certain bacteria, also in the muscle cell, and that is how we are getting the muscle cramps. Okay, the students, please revise this concept and have a nice day, everyone. Take care. Bye bye.